Morning all to those who have joined us early. And Peter,
Morning.
I liked your background there with the gold in the background.
Morning.
Looked like is it a man cave that you're in there, Peter? Oh, you're on mute.
No, that is Virginia Courtaulds' bathroom at Elton Palace in London, but the picture is turned sideways, so it does look like the bath is actually a cave door entrance. But never mind.
Right. And can I inquire why, Peter, you've chosen that background?
It's just the most bling thing I've ever seen. So,
Is it?
Yeah, that's all.
What, better than seeing your laundry airing behind you in the background? And it looks very sunny where Debbie is.
Sunny Bournemouth, yes.
Yeah, I'm hoping everyone today is suitably got their water, got their fan in the background. I think, Laurie, you've got a shirt on there. You're a braver man than me. I'm in a t-shirt. So I'm going to ask for everybody to keep their cameras off, if that's possible, to keep the bandwidth going or whatever. I will keep my camera on at the moment to welcome you all, and then when we get into the nitty-gritty of stuff, then you'll be focusing on the materials, which I hopefully will get the slide pack up if I can work my own IT. Oh, come on, Justin. There we go. Don't want that one. There we go. Right, let's get this up. We are recording this session, so you can watch it at your leisure, or your colleagues can, or if you can't sleep at night, you could watch it to keep you suitably, or put you to sleep, or keep you awake, one of the two. Right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep, Justin, we can, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. We'll obviously give it the obligatory few minutes to let everybody join. If I could
Justin,
ask,
just while you're giving that few minutes there, just to reiterate to people, all sessions are recorded and are available on our YouTube page. All slides will also be available online on the collaboration base and on the public website. The chat function is disabled today. If you are looking to submit a question, go to slido.com and use the code MHHS. Chat will be disabled beginning before, during, and after this session.
Thank you, Kevin. And is everybody in control of their own microphone, Kevin, or can
we had one person who was off mute, but they're now on mute, so that's been swiftly.
Okay. So our ask for you all is to keep yourselves on mute and put your questions through on Slido, which, if I've got the link, if I can't do that, come on, I'll show you. Oh, it's going a bit slow. Yeah, there you go. That's a link there at MHHS. Right, I'll jump back to the beginning. Let's get this back. Give it a minute more and then we'll crack on. We've got a lot to cover today, and you'll have to excuse, it will be Kevin, Spencer and myself that will be primarily presenting today. But we have got two further sessions, which I'll show in a further slide, on a deep dive on settlement and a surgery where you can ask a question. So that is sort of like the opportunity to really get into the nitty gritty. what we hope to do today is give you two things. If you're not already familiar with the design artifacts, run you through the types of design artifacts that cover the end-to-end meter to bank process or meter settlement process, and also to give you a flavour of how that meter to bank process works under market-wide half-hourly settlement. So without further ado, I will start. Let's go to the next slide, Justin. There we go. So what we want to do today is, first of all, welcome you. I see there's over 130 people joined. So thank you for giving up your Friday morning. And I hope you'll find this session informative and helpful to cover how the new market-wide half-hourly settlement process will work. My name is Justin Andrews. I'm part of the program design team, and I also chair the design advisory group, which are responsible for signing off all these wondrous design artifacts that you'll see a few of them today. And I'm be ably assisted by Kevin Spencer, who is a member of the design team, who has had his hand in on probably all the design artifacts that you'll see. And both Kevin and I have been involved in the target operating model work for a number of years. And if any of you were at the session on Monday, you would have heard a brief history that Kevin and I gave, that we've been looking at market-wide half-hourly settlement over a number of years, and the culmination is the target operating model, which we'll do a little bit of a recap on, and we'll go through various process steps. So today we're going to focus on data collection, data processing. We will use the various artifacts. We're primarily going to show you the various business process models. I will flash up an example of a user requirement specification so you can get an idea, if you haven't already, the structure of the user requirements. And then we will refer to the various method statements for each of the business processes. And that's where the detailed calculations of each of the processes of the target operating model are covered. As Kevin has said, all questions via Slido. What we'll see is we might take all the questions at the end, but what I might do is ask Kevin, say when we've done data processing up front, look at a couple of questions to see if it's worth dealing with those questions when we've just done that subject, and so it's sort of hot and familiar in our minds. As you can read there, that's what the outcomes of, hopefully an increased understanding. Kevin's already talked about the outputs, and he's also given us a rule of engagement. So that's what we want to do. What we'll do is I'm going to ask Kevin just to set the context again of the target operating model. We won't go over it in too much detail because we did that at the session on Monday, but I think it really sets the scene for the data processing, the Elexon central systems work, which we'll then go through. So target operating model, the floor is yours, Kevin. Oh, before 1 minute, Kevin, I just wanted to, I forgot I'd put this slide in, remind you of, on the slide pack here, I've shown the two locations of where all the design artifacts are. On the left-hand side, that's where it is on the website. On the right-hand side, that's where it is on the program collaboration base. And I'm sure you're vastly already familiar with all of that already, but the links are there on the slides when you get them later. Kevin.
Good morning, everybody. As Justin said, we did run through this on Monday, but it is worth just going through it to set the context again. So in front of you, hopefully, is a diagram that you're familiar with. This was the, it is a slightly upgraded version of the diagram of the target operating model that was delivered to Ofgem in 2017. And we'll just take you through the elements of that. So if we have the next slide, please, Justin. So starting at the top with the metering services, metering services are obviously the services that fit the meters, commission them and maintain them, rectify any faults, swap out as necessary. We've got two flavours of the metering service. We've got one for smart and traditional meters and a separate one for advanced. Next slide, please, Justin. So the middle layer here is the data services. We'll start with the smart data service, which processes the data for both smart and traditional meters. There are three sub-services within that. There is the meter data retrieval service, which interacts with the data and communications company to get data from the smart meters. There is the man in the van meter reading service, which will eyeball the traditional meters and maybe some smart meters where there are comms faults. And within that, you have the processing service, which will validate the data that's come from the meter data retrieval service and the meter reading service and process the data into half-hourly periods for settlement. Next slide, please, Justin. The advanced data service is very synonymous with the current market role of half-hourly data collector. It does all the things a half-hourly data collector currently does, with just a few tweaks to some of the processing methods that they use. So they will use mobile telephony or even public service telephone networks to get data from the advanced meters. So that's the traditional advanced plus any advanced meters that are currently in profile classes 3 and 4. And they will dial those up, and likewise they will validate that data and process that data into half-hourly periods for onwards into BSC central systems. If we move on to the unmetered segment, so the orange highlighting here signifies that this is a distribution business provided service. The ones with the blue highlighting are the ones that are supplier provided services. So the unmetered supplies operator is the party that interacts with the unmetered suppliers customers and collects their inventory data, and it will validate that and pass it to the unmetered supplies data service, who will also validate that data, and they will use their equivalent meter and various pieces of other information to process the data into the half-hourly periods to go into BSC central systems. So Justin, if you move on, so at the bottom here we've got BSC central systems and their services. There's a number of services within that. There is the market-wide data service, which is slightly synonymous with the current role called half-hourly and data aggregators. Basically a service that will add up the data by various categories, which are called consumption component classes. It will also calculate losses using line loss factors submitted by distribution businesses. We've got load shaping service, which is calculating load shapes, which is effectively what will be replacing the current profiling arrangements, but only for the few remaining, or hopefully few remaining, traditional meters and smart meters where there are issues getting the half-hourly data from the meter, or indeed if those for some domestic import customers can opt out of providing their half-hourly data. So those load shapes will also be used for estimating in those circumstances. We have the volume allocation service, which is synonymous with the current supplier volume allocation agent role, and this is the one that will take that data from the market-wide data service. It will add that data up across any balancing mechanism units where necessary, and that may be necessary during transition, certainly. And it will apply what we call this GSP group correction. So it will ensure that the amount of energy allocated to suppliers is equal to the view of what we call GSP group take, which is the volume of energy entering a distribution region within any particular settlement period. Also within that, we have the industry standing data, which is the sort of rebrand of the existing market domain data. It's got some new stuff that's not in market domain data, and a lot of stuff in market domain data won't be in industry standing data because it relates to the sort of legacy non-half hourly processes. So I hope that was useful. That was a quick, fairly rapid run through of the target operating model and the various services within it. So Justin, what do you want to move on to the data processing? And we're going to look at the BPM first.
Yes. So let's see if I can. Oh, hold on. I'm going to do this. I don't want that. I want to get back to where I was. Right. Sorry, everyone. Right, here we go. Right, so what we've got here is the data processing balance.
Can't see it yet, Justin. Can't see it yet.
Does it come up?
Yeah, can see that now.
Right. Okay. Is that big enough for you, Kevin, and others to read?
It's maybe a little bit more zoomed in. Might be useful for everyone.
Okay. Bear with me. Is that a bit better?
That should be okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Kevin.
Okay, so these are the business process models. It works on a sort of swim lane basis with the various services down the left-hand side. And within the business process models, there are a number of steps. All those steps are labelled, and they can be mapped onto the process descriptions, which is in another document that you can see. So I'm going to quickly run through the data service processes, just at a high level. Go on a bit more detail when we get onto the method statements. So if we start at the top here with the unmetered supplies service, the unmetered supplies service will have collected some data. So that will be that inventory data, which has come in from the unmetered supplies operators on the new TTM flow, the D388. It will validate that data and reject any on the response flow D389. And it would embed that data in its equivalent meter, which is the piece of software which calculates the half-hourly data. The calculation process involves collecting further, more dynamic data, so data from what we call central management systems, which control street lighting systems, which says when individual pieces of unmetered supplies apparatus is switched on and off. And if it hasn't got an inventory, or it will use a load shape to default that data. So on a daily basis, it will press the big red button, and that will spit out the half-hourly consumption data for each of the unmetered supplies MPANs to which the unmetered supplies data service is appointed. And that data will go on the interface IF021, and you'll be able to see that details of what's in that interface in the interface catalogue. If we go on to the data service, so this diagram applies to both advanced and smart. So following data collection, the either smart or advanced service using either the DCC or that mobile telephony have collected the data. That data might need to be unpacked, but it gets unpacked, and within the data service there is the processing service, which will validate that consumption data. calculate a meter advance if it's only a meter reading, but if it's the half hourly data, it will validate the individual half hourly data. Where stuff is invalid, it will then go through the estimation processes, which you can see, or if stuff's missing, it will estimate half hourly data for the missing data, using the load shapes or using previous data from the meter, depending on which segment you are in. If the data's all fine, passes validation, then it will go straight out on that IF21. And likewise, if it's estimated, that will also go on the IF21, but it will be flagged as estimated. So the actual data will have actual data flags, and the estimated data will have estimated flags, and what we call quality indicators. And there's various levels of that depending on how good the estimate is, and how good the estimate depends on what data you have actually got. So if we just scroll down, so that data goes into the data integration platform via that interface, and then that is published out, and that information then can be consumed by BSC Central Systems, and they again will perform some validation on that, but that data can also then be consumed by the supplier, the LDSO, or anybody else who has a valid reason to subscribe to that data. I think that was all I was going to say on that.
Kevin,
is there any areas of the diagram that you think I should have covered, Justin?
No. I was going to say, shall we go on to the various method statements so people can see the calculations that the UMSDS is doing and the SDS and ADS are doing?
We can. Do you want to start with the UMSDS then? I'll just talk them through that one.
Yeah, hold on. This one. Everybody see this?
Yep. So you'll see that a lot of the information in the unmetered supplies data service is similar to the requirements for the equivalent meter, which is currently in BSCP 520. The document sets out the responsibility of the UMSDS. It sets out what validation requirements what the validation requirements are on the inventory data. I actually think we might have removed the approval of the equivalent meter from this document, just looking at that now. It gives an overview of the calculations that are performed by the software. It talks about the PECU arrays, which are the PECU arrays, which are these arrays of 30 photo cells, which basically tell you for a region, might be on a council roof or something like that. They dial it up and it says when each of those photo cells switched on and off, which give an indication for that that say council's set of street lighting when those lights do actually switch on and off. It's got all the requirements for the equivalent meter functionality, and it sets out the validation of the inventory. It talks about load shapes and the defaulting, and about the publishing and those data quality flags, which I referred to. So if you just scroll down, we should see all of those elements. So we've got the responsibilities of the UMSDS set out in section 2 there. Now the UMSDS it is now typically, currently, if it's a meter administrator, that meter administrator is contracted directly with the customer. And now what's changing under market-wide half-hourly settlement is it'll be the supplier's responsibility to procure this service on behalf of his customers, because we will be including a lot of smaller customers such as parish councils, in the half-hourly world, whereas currently meter administrators really only deal with what we call the big stuff. You just scroll down a bit, Justin. Yeah, there's information on what data they need to record, and then we have the general validation requirements relating to that P388 inventory data. Yes, so approval of equivalent meter is in there, but it just currently points you back to BSCP 520, which has got the step processes for getting equivalent meter approved. So I don't know if it's worth noting that there currently are only 2 meter administrators, and we're expecting there still to only be 2 UMSDSs at the start of market-wide half-hourly settlement. Clearly, the opportunity for other parties to come in would be there, but they would have to provide their own equivalent meter, and that equivalent meter would need to be approved. So we then set out the equivalent meter calculations. If you keep going to the next section, I will keep going, Justin, because I'm not going to talk through all the calculations. It then talks a little bit about the PECU arrays, which I previously mentioned, and how those PECU arrays, what needs to be taken into consideration when they're citing those PECU arrays. Obviously, you don't want a PECU array which is in shadow, because it wouldn't then see the relevant light levels. Keep going, Justin. So all of this stuff is relating to PECU arrays. So keep going. This is still all to do with detail about PECU arrays and their citing. And we've got sections here about the actual functionality of the equivalent meter. So like I said, you can have an equivalent meter processing central management system data. It can be processing PECU array data, or it could be making what we call a passive calculation, and that passive calculation just uses information that is in it that will be in ISD, which gives the offset from sunset and sunrise. Sorry about that. Which allows a sort of passive calculation to be made in the event that you haven't got any of that dynamic data. Just scroll down to the bottom now, Justin. So all the data gets fed into the equivalent meter, including that industry standing data, which identifies the charge codes, which gives you the circuit watts, and the switch regimes, which give you those operating hours. And again, like I said, they press the big red button, and that will split the data out of the bottom. If they haven't got any data, they can apply a load shape. They've got 2 load shapes that they can use, one that's for active import and one that's for active export. Now, it's worth noting, currently there is no such thing as active export associated with unmetered supplies, but we want to make sure that we do future-proof the market-wide half-hourly settlement processes. And at the bottom here we've got that publish, which I said will be on that IF21, which is noted at the bottom there, and it also sets the data flag. So if it's actual data, the data will be A flagged. If it's estimated using a load shape, it will be an E flag. If it's noted that the MPAN is de-energized, then they will set the data to 0 and apply a ZE flag. And at the bottom, there's just a bit about the audit requirements. So that was a lightning tour through the unmetered supplies method statement. So shall we move on to the smart data service method statement, Justin?
Yes, I just wanted to just recap on that. So am I right in summarising for unmetered supplies, for half-hourly or market-wide half-hourly settlement, basically the non-half-hourly element of that disappears, and the half hourly as it is today is modified with a few extra sort of validations and checks to make it market-wide half hourly settlement. Is that a reasonable summary, Kevin?
It is. It is. Lee, can you submit a thing on Slido? If
Yeah. Okay.
Has anybody got any specific, or Kevin?
I think Lee's about to put something in Slido, so and there might be already.
Not Kevin Spencer, but the other Kevin. Kevin, have we got any specific questions on unmetered supply?
Nothing that can't wait until the end, Justin, at the moment.
Okay. So shall we move on to the SDS one, Kevin?
Yeah.
Is that big enough?
You could just make it a bit bigger, I guess, Justin.
See how that. Is that okay?
Yeah. So this method statement sets out the requirements for the smart data service. It defines how the smart data service gets the UTC period level data. It talks about how that data is validated. So there's some general validation requirements just for the register reading. There's validation requirements for the actual smart meter data that's at period level. And it then goes on to talk about the load shaping and load shaping categories that are used for the estimation purposes. It then shows how that data and register readings or otherwise is used to calculate meter advances, and it does that for different metering types. It then goes on to set out a number of methods, estimation methods, and those estimation methods sort of range from the sort of in a sort of hierarchy from the most accurate to the least accurate. Some methods only apply to certain types of meters, so some only apply to smart, some only apply to trad, some apply to both, and some only apply to import and some only to export. So if we just scroll through the document, it talks about accessing the smart meter data. I think there's a nod in here that we might have a different settlement period duration in the future. You know, we could potentially move to 15-minute settlement, and we've tried to future-proof all the arrangements so that interface 21 does allow for the UTC or settlement period duration to be set, which could be set to 15 or potentially even 5 minutes. Just keep scrolling down and we're adjusting. So this next section sets out the general validation requirements for register readings, and it also, we've got a section here on being careful about validating register readings where you've got data from the back end of the meter, which you've corrected remotely, but the actual registers that you would eyeball on a smart meter could be only 5 or 6 digits with the previous 4 or 5 digits truncated. So there's just this section here on taking care, where if you get a customer read that's only 5 digits long, that you're accurately calculating a meter advance using the correct digits from the back end of the smart meter. And then it goes on checks that you've got to do, such as checking the serial number, checks that you've got to do if you spot that there is zero consumption, and checks for negative consumption. The IF21, it's been noted, doesn't actually allow you to submit negative data because it hasn't got a it hasn't got a sign in the field in the interface. Clearly, if you did try and put a negative one in there without the sign, it would look like a positive one. But obviously, there's only so many things that we can do to try and avoid people submitting negatives. Clearly, the data could be for active import or active export, but that is taken into account further downstream rather than by the sign in front of the field. We then goes on to talk about the validation of the smart meter data and what we're expecting in terms of checks on that. Keep going, Justin. And again, there's checks that the period level data is not negative. There are a couple of checks here. There's a check against a maximum permissible energy limit. If you have a settlement period which exceeds that, then you would reject it, and we need to estimate those periods. We've then got a further one. If you just scroll down a bit, there's a process called Smart Meter Advanced Reconciliation, and basically this is a process whereby you would add up all the half-hourly data and compare it to the meter advances. So you've got the total cumulative register, which you'll be collecting, and you can add up the meter advance between an advance calculated between two cumulative register reads, and I think we've said that needs to be done at least monthly. Going on, there's stuff here about identifying missing or corrupt data. If you keep scrolling down, Justin. We then get on to estimation, and there's a section here that talks about the load shapes, and it tells you, it sets out the data items on which the load shapes are defined. Now, the Smart Data Service will have access to all the registration data for any MPAN that it is processing, so it will know for each MPAN which market segment it is in. Is it in smart, advanced or unmetered? Obviously, it's only looking at the smart ones because this is the Smart Data Service, so you can see it says in that definition it must be S. GSP group ID, so the region that it's in. The domestic premise indicator, which is either true or false, true being it is a domestic premise and false being it is not. The measurement quantity ID, which relates to the direction of flow indicator in the registration data, and the direction of flow is just I and E, but the measurement quantity ID is AE and AI. These two data items are mapped to each other in the measurement quantity table in ISD. So it's worth noting that the Smart Data Service will also be ingesting all of that ISD data, standing data, so that it can check that. There's also a connection type indicator. Most of these, well, pretty much all of these will be whole current. But we're also setting in the registration data stuff that says, is it LVCT, is it HVCT, or is it EHVCT? That isn't of interest to the Smart Data Service, as I said, because it should be this should only be whole current meters, because we haven't got any smart CT metering systems, and any traditional or advanced CT meters will be in the advanced segment. So we then go on. This shows the tables. Now we have got some special calculations for traditional or non-smart meters in profile classes 2 and 4, where maybe the customer hasn't had a choice to fit a smart meter because his land, he's got to go through his landlord or something like that. And for that, what we're doing is we're looking at the peak and off-peak registers, and we're applying those to specific periods of the load shape. So what we're saying is, if you've got off-peak advance, you would apply that between in that first row there, midnight and 7 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of the off-peak data would go on the rest of the day, and the calculation for that is set out further down. So this table gives an indication of the load shapes. The load shapes are calculated using actual UTC period data. So that de minimis value on the end there is for the load shaping surface. It says if you got less than 50 for a load shape category, then you would default to a national load shape. So that's what that's signifying. STS doesn't need to process that; it just will receive a load shape. There are then a number of totals which are provided. So the load shapes are provided on the interface 22, and the totals are provided on the interface 23, and that gives you just the load shape total, which is the sum of the period values, and then there's a couple of other ones. There's the peak total, the off-peak total, and then we've got some 7-day rolling totals that are used in some of the estimation methods further down. Section 5, this sets out deriving meter advances. From a smart meter, you could calculate meter advances. You could potentially also calculate a daily advance. If you got 2 midnight reads, you could actually collect a daily consumption. There's a service request which allows you to get that as well. And then we've got daily advance estimate. So daily advance estimate is where you haven't got a daily advance, but you've got previous information which allows you to calculate an estimate that you can use until you have got actual daily advances or meter advances. Or you can use those daily advance estimates to estimate where you haven't got any settlement period level data from the meter. So this table here tells you how these are calculated. It also gives you the service requests that you would get the information to calculate that on from that you would send to the DCC in order to get that data. We're expecting this data to be collected on settlement day +1 and processed very quickly for onward into settlement. If you keep scrolling down, again, this is how to calculate those various advances. Keep scrolling a bit, Justin. Don't know if Justin's frozen.
Are we on section 6, Kevin?
Yeah. So section 6
Do you want me to go
now,
further?
No, well, I'll just give a brief insight. So this is where section 6 is just the general requirements for SDS estimation, and if you scroll down further. So there's lots of stuff on validating estimated data and the estimation of export, and then you get onto section 7. So this is where all the calculations are set out, and each of the methods that you can use. It sets out the identifiers used. So there's quite a few subscripts in the calculations, and this is a list of the subscripts that are used in the method statement. And then it goes down a hierarchy. So basically the method 0 is just where you've got one period missing, and then the next one is where you've got a few missing periods. And as it goes down these various calculations, it depends on what data you have got as to which of these calculations that you use. And you can see that there's the formula for each of the methods set out, and the circumstances in which you would use those methods. And you'll also notice that with each method, it says what the record the flag data quality flag should be applied. So on that method 4, you can see that it gets an E4 flag, and if you on method 5, it gets an E5 flag. And so that will be put against the data calculated for the settlement period, or UTC period, because it's worth noting that all this data is in UTC throughout the year. Conversion occurs later down in the process in the market by data service. There are a couple of things at the bottom here as we go down. So there's stuff to do with estimating for long-term vacant sites where you've been notified, and there's a method using an annual consumption. So there's another method statement out there which says that central settlements will be calculating annual consumption values on a monthly basis, and they will be available in what we're calling EES, which is an inquiry service, which is more real-time than the current inquiry service echoes. So we're expecting to display the annual consumption for each MPAN calculated in central systems on that service. And there's a couple down the end here where you're either long-term vacants or the site's been disabled, where the service will just be estimating zeros and setting the flags appropriately. So you've got ZE2, ZE3 flags there. There's a couple of processes there if you need to deem a read using the data that you've got, using method 7, and I think that's pretty much it, Justin, is it? Yeah, you've got a list of reason codes here that need on the IF21. There is also the estimation reason code, which allows you to give more information on the reason why you're estimating. And then finally, there's just a list of site visit checks if you could get a site visit report. That's that. Just set out the bottom. That's pretty much just a lift from the old BSCP 504, which is the non-half hourly requirements.
Kevin, is it worth highlighting now the proposal to have a replacement to the EAT?
I think that's what I did allude to. So if you scroll up, back up, you will see that method. Keep going. Yeah, so next one up.
That.
Yeah, so method 9 uses this annual consumption value. There is a method statement which details how that annual consumption value will be calculated, and the quality of the annual consumption value will also be set, so you'll know whether it's largely been based on actuals or if it's based on some actuals and half the year's estimated.
I think it's just worth at this point, Kevin, then to highlight, if I can click the right button. I'm trying to find the annual consumption. Here we go. How we're proposing in the programme that the annual consumption is calculated. Has that come up? Yeah,
I can see that. So yeah, it's just got some background there, and it talks about how the market-wide data service will select those MPANs for calculation, and if you just keep on scrolling, Justin, it then talks about how you would derive it and how you'd set that quality flag and the effective date. And there's just a little bit on there about next steps.
So basically, you're saying that when there's a full year's worth of data, the calculation will use all the data for that year. If there's only a partial year, then it will be scaled. If it's above a certain percent of X percent to be determined, that X percent, and when it's less than that X percent, then there'll be class averages used. Yes.
Yes.
The reason I thought it was worth mentioning about this annual consumption, because under non-half or under market-wide half-hourly settlement, for settlement purposes, you don't need a replacement of the EAC, the consumption. However, you know, in doing the work within the design, you know, there was, you know, quite clear by market participants that, you know, a replacement to the EAC was needed for these reasons, and that's why we've put in this new calculation and this new data item for him.
I mean, clearly from market startup, it's going to take, you know, to build up 365 days is going to take a year, you know, or over a year before you're starting to see 365 values. So I think you'll start with the EAC, that if you know there is an EAC out there, it'll start with an EAC and then it'll gradually get replaced as you can improve the calculation.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to ADS, Advanced Data Service Methodology Statement?
So yeah, so much of this has been taken from BSCP 502, but with some tweaks. It follows the same format as the Smart Data Service Method Statement, and it talks about where you've got the actual half-hourly or UTC period consumption, as we're calling it. It's got all the checks that you do on the outstations. Likewise, it has got the meter advanced reconciliation checks to be undertaken. Checks if you've got main and check meters, what you need to do in relation to that, and what you do if that check is not what you're expecting. For checks according to the code of practice, which talk about the maximum permissible energy, and again, if it fails validation there, then you'd be expected to use one of the estimation methods which are set out further down the method statement.
Is there anything here you particularly want to highlight of?
No, so again, most of the estimation method statements estimation methods haven't significantly changed. So there's you see these A, B, C, and then there are separate methods for export. I guess the one thing that has changed is you could have some domestic customers in the advanced segment, and because you've got those domestic customers, those customers could potentially opt out of providing their half-hourly settlement data. So within the registration system, we will have what's called a consent granularity flag. That consent granularity flag can be set to H, meaning you can collect the half-hourly data, D, which means you can only collect daily data, or M, which means you can only collect monthly data. So as well as all the standard methods which aren't really changing, this method statement then goes on to show how you would use load shapes in those circumstances where the consent granularity is not equal to H. You get that information on the interfaces, which updates you if it changes, or when a service is first appointed to an MPAN. And so if you scroll down, Justin, you will then see some methods which look very similar to those ones that we just showed you in the Smart Data Service. If you keep scrolling, Justin. Yeah, so you can see method 2, method 3. So these methods would be the methods that you would use if you had an opted out customer. I think that's all I was going to say on this one, Justin.
Okay. So that is data processing covered. what I just wanted to show, and what we've shown is the business process model, and I just wanted to highlight the requirements, if that comes up, to give you a. So we've shown you the BPM, we've shown you the method statement associated with each data service. Let me make this a little bit bigger. With each service under the target operating model, we have a set of requirements, we have a reference, we have who the requirement is on, as you can see here from that column C, the area, the requirement title, then a description of the requirement and any supporting information that that is needed, and it can show you there what the process is, you know, where it's covered, what the step number is, and if there's any relevant interfaces. So you'll see there in this particular set of requirements, we've got all the data service requirements, and then we have got them split by area. There's ADS, and they also cover, I presume they'll be the ones that are common to ADS and SDS, and we've got the UMS, the S ones too. So in a nutshell, if you want to understand the requirements on the smart data service, what you need to do is look at the BPM, look at the requirements, look at the method statement and the business process description. The other document or design artifact that is also relevant to you is the interface catalog. Kevin, can you tell me that everybody can, or you can see the interface catalog?
I can see that.
I think there will be a separate session to run you through the actual contents of the interface catalog, but in a nutshell, there's the cover sheet, and if you click on each of these, it'll take you to the various links or various tabs. So one I've clicked on before, which is a very useful one, is the interface list. Let me just make that a little bit bigger. So what you see there is the actual interface ID, its name, its description, who it's going from, who it's going to, in the primary role there, the always, but also the main role, but also if there are other roles that are needed, and if there's any impact on the, is it Energy Inquiry Service, EES or ECHOS,
Yes.
and the various business processes and publications. I'll just click on one which will then, if you click on that, you'll get to the actual interface itself. And this is the load shape data, which comes from the load shaping service within Elexon Central Systems. You'll see there the name and the various sort of attributes and the descriptions. And then you'll come down here into the actual description of the data items that are within that interface. And so you can see UTC, settlement date. And what we've also shown here is by using chevrons, and I'm sure this is all, there's an explanation in this design artifact. What that means is that you have it by settlement day, you will have it by the load shape criteria here, and then if there's another, then it will be the actual data by that load shape criteria, by that load shape category, and then you'll have the actual value and any default flag shown. So that is the interface catalog, and that is data processing covered. Let's get on to central settlement. So let me come back to
two things. Did we want to take some questions now, and after that, should we have a break? Because we've covered the first hour.
Yeah. Kevin Redmond, have we got any really popular questions for data processing?
We have a lot of popular questions, full stop, if we'd like to run through a few of them now.
Yeah, let's try 3, and then let's have a 5-minute comfort break.
Okay, I'll go for the 3 most popular questions that we have there. So first one coming across, What flexibility will be built into the subscription service? For example, can you choose which MPANs or how frequently you want to receive the half-hourly data?
Not sure that this is the right form to answer that, but it will be a subscription service, and there will be validation rules within there to say whether you can you are entitled to that data, and the routing will be set up within there.
I'm going to have a guess that you
sure.
could do it on a daily basis, but we have got Paul Pettit on the line. Paul, can you shed any light on that, or we'll take that question away?
Sounds like Paul's having a bit of a connection issue there at the moment. I can't really hear him.
Okay, let's
we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, next question. We'll take that one away. Next question, Kevin.
How will price comparison websites work if there's no EAC?
Well, they will, because we will have an annualized, an annual consumption. So there is an EAC replacement. So that, so they will work on that new value.
Super, thank you, Justin. And then third most popular question, how is a supplier expected to subscribe for the half-hourly interface 021 data, and where is this described in the documentation? I think we just answered that one there.
So I don't know whether Paul's
yeah, I'm back. Is that better?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So just going back to the first one, so I understand the subscription service, basically there's two options. I think you can basically poll the queues and say this will be defined, I think, in one of the follow-up sessions about the technical side of the solution and the services, but you can subscribe, or you can also subscribe to webhooks. And the webhook subscription will basically push the information out as it becomes, or it will notify you that the information is there as it becomes available, so you don't have to continually poll. So there is some optionality there, so I understand it, but I think the guys will cover that off in the technical work end-to-end sessions that are due very shortly. And I joined at the last one. What was the last question you just?
About suppliers subscribing, was it, Kevin?
The question, sorry.
Yeah, the question was about, sorry, they've just been downvoted now. So how is the supplier expected to subscribe for the half-hourly interface 021 data, and where is this described in the documentation?
Again, it's in the, if you look at the end-to-end technical specification, that details how you connect and gives you an overview of how you connect to the data integration platform. And again, I believe that's going to be covered off in one of the technical sessions coming up in the next week or so.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Right, let's pause there. Let's have, I'm going to give you 4 minutes, a quick break, and we'll restart at 5 minutes past. Okay, welcome back everyone. Hope you managed to have a comfort break, top up any fluids that you've got. And so like the first hour, we've covered what market participants and their service providers have got to do to read the meters, process that data, validate it, estimate it where appropriate, and then provide that half-hourly data into the Elexon central systems for settlement processing. And what we've got is 3 main services of processing that data, and also a further service, the industry standing data, which is all the reference data, the operational parameters that everybody works to, along with the registration data from the registration service. So what we'll do again is run you through the various business process models and the method statement, and also we'll give you an overview of the industry standing data through the entity map and the data items. And apologies if anybody heard a cockerel crowing in the background there. I've got the windows open and we've got chickens. And I'm sorry if that has come through on the recording for everyone. Right. Okay, so let's move on to the right thing. I want to look at load shaping. So can everybody see, if I make that a little bit bigger, the BPM for load shaping?
See that, Justin.
Okay, and is that sufficiently big enough?
I'd say give it a little bit more zoom, yeah.
Give it a little bit more of a nudge?
A little bit more of a nudge, yeah, that's perfect.
Right, so what we basically are showing in here with the load shaping service, and I think, you know, what we want to just, I'll just touch on again is, you know, that top line there gives you a description, tells you about all the actors that are involved, the various interfaces coming in, and if I can find the right, and then the publications and sort of like the entry and exit business process models. Certain things that are highlighted in yellow are things that are still to be agreed. But primarily what you've got here is, as from the, you know, the processing, the data processing services, we've got the half-hourly data coming into the load shaping service. The load shaping service is all about creating the load shapes that people need to use to either estimate where there's missing half-hourly data, or there isn't half-hourly data available for that particular, say, traditional meter, or that sort of half-hourly capable meter, be it a smart or advanced service, because of communications or any other problems. So, you know, we follow the same process really. We receive the data, the load shaping service performs some validation, and that validation is covered in the requirement and the method statement. It needs registration data from the registration services in order to validate that data. And what we've then got is, once that data has been validated, we initiate the load shaping run. And what we're doing is selecting the actual data that we need for the load shaping calculation for that UTC date. And in order to do that, we access the ISD data from the industry standing data service within Elexon Central Systems. And then what we need to do is perform a number of calculations in there, therefore, to calculate the actual load shapes themselves and the totals that Kevin referred to further. Then there is a generic process validation and reasonableness check, and we have this validation in all the Elexon Central Systems. If there are issues, then the load shaping service has to investigate and resolve. And if once resolved or it passes validation straight away, we then calculate the 7-day totals and issue all the load shape data back via the DIP to the industry participants and the data services, but also the load shape data is needed for market-wide data service for any defaulting that it therefore does. That in a nutshell is the load shaping service. And what I'll therefore jump on to now is the load shaping service method statement, which I haven't opened. Right, where is that? Load shaping service method statement, there's Vaz. Ah, here it is. Why is it up there? Apologies for the slight delay there. Right. We've got the load shaping method statement. Kevin, would you take us through? I mean, I think we've covered a lot of this.
Yeah, I think you've got a redlined version. I think you've got a redlined version there with the versions that have version 3.0, so that have got all the redlining accepted. But I think if you just carry on.
Why have I got a redline version there? Just make sure. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
you see that, Kevin?
Yeah. So this is the one that's had all the track changes accepted. Because this has been conditionally approved, we need a redline version so we can demonstrate what has changed since the conditional approval. Yeah, so basically this sets out how the load shaping service identifies the various categories and how it uses the registration data for the MPANs to understand which category each MPAN's in. There's a number of checks on ingestion, which is this table that you're looking at here, and there are also it says what you send out if it fails any of those validation checks. This same table is in the MDS method statement as well. Keep on going down. Yeah, so we've got stuff about identifying the load shaping categories and the data items that you'll need from registration in order to identify them, and that maps back to that load shaping table that you saw in the SDS method statement. It talks about the totals and how they are calculated, and likewise, we've got this table as you had in the Smart Data Service, which gives you the identifiers which are set out in the footnotes, and then it sets out the load shaping methods. So this is where the calculations and the formulas are for calculating those load shapes at period level, and it shows what you do for a default calculation. So I said if there's less than 50 MPANs, then you do a default calculation which makes it a sort of national calculation for the profile. So that would look at all, say it was you had data in GSP group A for active import domestic customers, it would take all the domestic import across all the GSP groups and calculate an average across that for the default calculation. So basically the calculations are set out here. There's also the calculations for the totals, and then there's a couple of backstop things to make sure that in the event that you've got little or no data, that you can still produce a load shape, even if that load shape is only based on data from a previous day of the same day type. And yeah, these are all the calculations for the various elements of the totals, and as I said, the two interfaces associated with the load shaping is 22, which is the period level stuff, and 23, which is the totals.
Okay, and is it worth saying, Kevin, that initially there will be 4 load shapes for SDS by GSP group, one for active import, one for active export, and
yeah, so if you just scroll down, I think if you scroll down a bit, there's the tables here. Yeah. So you've got market segment, GSP group. I don't know what happened to this table, but the true and false domestic premise indicator, is it active import, is it active export? You've got those special values for the non-smart bits, and the connection type, which is whole current for the smart segment. But if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the advanced ones. These aren't divided up by whether it's domestic or not, and it's not divided up by the GSP groups. It's just is it active import, is it active export, and then it really depends on that connection type indicator, which is the second to last column. So you've got whole current, LV CT, low voltage CT sites, high voltage CT sites, and extra high voltage CT sites, and then those two at the bottom of the unmetered ones, which we talked about in the unmetered method statement.
Okay, so that's load shaping. We move on to market-wide data service. So again, the BPM follows the same standard as all the other BPMs, and what we've got in market-wide data service is it's receiving the half-hourly data, and you can see that, and it produces and it does the same validation that load shaping is doing. But in this case, if there is any failed validation, the data will be rejected, and there will be an exception report generated by market-wide data service, or MDS, which goes back to, which is the IF 014, both the data services and the relevant supplier. You can also see the registration data is coming into MDS, just sort of mirroring the same that it did for the load shaping service, and it's using that data for validation. The MDS is identifying the settlement day for the run it's doing. So in load shaping service, it was using the UTC date. Here, we are processing data in MDS per settlement day, so in clock time. It accesses the UTC period data that it needs. It's also performing another check before data is used, where there is either no consumption data for that particular metering system, or MPAN, or where we need to also identify something which is de-energized and there's data for it, and an exception report will be generated again for that, which then goes back to the relevant, I think it goes back to market participants, so it probably go back to the data services and the supplier. So we've selected the data, we've accessed the data for that settlement day, we've applied any defaulting rules that we need to for the MPANs, and then what we're going to then do is to allocate the MPANs to the balancing mechanism units, or additional balancing mechanism units, and in brackets there it says anything that needs to be done for BMU storage, so we can then calculate the losses by MPAN for the MDS run. Once MDS has done that, then it calculates it. This is the main calculation that MDS does to then produce the reports that it needs to do, and then undertake the various process validation, investigate any issues, and then produce the reports which then go out to the various participants via this method, or these reports are then provided to the volume allocation service for them to do its calculations, or there are various other reports that are needed by Elexon in its role as the performance assurance administrator, providing also reports to EMRS so it can do its calculations, and there is other MPAN data that is needed by Elexon for other systems. All of these reports are defined, and you can see the various numbers there. You'll also note that the boxes in yellow are still to be defined, and there is a in the plan for defining what the performance assurance processes will look like under market-wide half-hourly assessment. There's further validation of what EMRS needs for their reports, and also as part of the performance assurance work, there will need to be updates to the trading dispute process, because MDS will need to do certain calculations for a trading dispute. One thing to note here is that MDS, if it is doing a trading dispute run, will only be using data for MPANs that have been authorized within that authorized or approved trading dispute. I think that is the main elements of the MDS BPM, and hopefully I've got the method statement. No, I haven't got the method statement up for MDS. That is rather remiss of me. Here we go. Right, Kevin.
So again, similar in format to the other method statements, there's the background. It says what the main processes are that the MDS performs. It's got the general, that section B is those general validation requirements, and that is the same table that you see in the load shaping method statement. Noting that these exceptions go out on that IF14, which we just saw in the BPM. I think in reality this isn't two separate processes for LSS and MDS. I think this will just be done once when the data's not being sent twice in reality. So it will be the same check physically. Although this just sets out the logical. Section C then goes on to set out the market-wide data service methods, showing how you select the data for the run, how you process the data, because the data is in UTC, so you need to make sure that you're selecting the correct data for each load shaping run, and these little diagrams to show how that's done. Also, there's a couple of diagrams which show how you select data for the clock change days. So you need a 50-day and a 46-day. As with the other method statements, there's a table in here showing you the identifiers that are used in the subscripts of the calculations, which are set out below. Obviously, the MDS needs to identify the balancing mechanism units to which it's allocating the data, and it needs to identify if there's any additional balancing mechanism units for any supplier. It needs to identify any MPANs that require a default calculation. So if there's registration data which says there's an energized MPAN on any particular day, it will need to plug that gap when it does its run, and it will plug that gap using the appropriate load shape for that MPAN. So now we get into all the calculations that it's performing, and there are various levels to that, but it is basically allocating this energy to the appropriate consumption component classes within that GSP group and balancing mechanism unit. and it will eventually provide that data to the volume allocation service. It shows how to do the line loss factor calculations, so you can see that, and then it needs to sum up those line loss factors, and the calculations are all set out in here. There's also a requirement to provide storage facility data to National Grid as part of the transmission network use of system charges, and this section here sets out where you access the information, firstly to understand which MPANs are on the register, and then it shows the calculations for allocating that data. There are a few post-validation checks set out in here, just mainly sense checking that nothing went wrong during the run. And then it's got information for any exception reporting, which sets out the appropriate flags. And just one at the end there, just to make sure that if it provides the data to the volume allocation service, the volume allocation service will also perform some checks on the data, and it might go back to the market-wide data service, and it'd be up to the market-wide data service to understand if there was a problem, and it needs to tell the volume allocation service within an hour if it's going to be rejected and if a default calculation is required.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
That's it on that.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've covered how load shapes are calculated. We've covered what market-wide data service covers in sort of like the aggregation or the certain calculations that it's done. Now we will move on to the volume allocation service. If I get the right one, here we go. I'll make that a bit bigger. Again, follows the same format. Hold on, I'll make that a little bit more bigger. So let me move it over to the left. So we've just covered what the MDS calculations are. We've got these two new reports about the BM unit period level consumption and losses, basically by CCC, and we've also got some broken down by storage metering system that VAS needs to calculate things for. VAS, as it does, will use industry standing data for its run. So what it does here, it initiates its run, it identifies the settlement day for its run, and then what it needs to do is primarily access the MDS data, but also it needs to access the GSP group data from CDCA, from another Elexon central system, and use these two inputs. And what it's doing here is validating or identifying where there's either missing or invalid data from CDCA or from MDS, and where there is no data, VAS will notify MDS, please investigate and resolve, as we've just covered, but also will, I'll try not to go too quickly, but if there is missing data here, it therefore goes back to BSECO to agree the action to undertake. As currently specified by now, then BSECO might need to notify the BSE panel, they agree an action, and then hopefully we close that loop again, and GSP group data is therefore provided back to VAS. If the data is all valid, then this is where VAS does its main calculations, and we'll go through the calculations in the method statement, but it's basically calculating the supplier's period consumption, losses and non-losses, and calculating the GSP group correction factor and applying that to the uncorrected components. And those are what are covered by steps 60, 61, 62. Also, it's calculating the storage corrected component for BM unit storage. As with any other process, there is the validation of the output, and certain actions are taken if there is validation error, and if it can be investigated or resolved by VAS, and therefore then it can pass validation, or if it can't be resolved, then there is a notification out of this back to BSC Co to resolve. If everything is okay, VAS will produce its reports, and there are a number of reports that have been defined by the reporting workstream, and you can see all of those are labeled there, and then will go out, some via DIP, some will be going via the DTN if they are DTN amended reports, the transfer network, and there are obviously a number of reports that need to go to the settlement administration agent, SAA, in order for it to complete the settlement calculations. There are some ad hoc reports that are needed by Elexon, and they are separate reporting on GSP group correction factors, which are needed by Elexon. So in a nutshell, VAS receives the data from MDS, it receives data from CDCA, it receives ISD data, it does its calculations, produces the reports, and then up here other Elexon central systems. So I'm sure I've not got the VAS method statement open, so I will get that open. Kevin, can you give us a sweep through the VAS method statement, please?
Yeah, so again, follows a similar format. There's a bit of background up the front. It defines at a high level all the processes that the VAS is going to be undertaking. If you just scroll down to section B, Justin, it sets out again the identifiers that are used in the subscripts. It up here. Keep scrolling down. It shows the data that's being used from the market-wide data service. So that's the consumption and losses data. It needs to set a number of parameters within the system, which it is using to validate those that data against certain thresholds. And then it sets out the various methods that the volume allocation service will be using, including accessing the timetable. I think one important change to note is the group correction factor calculation is changing, and instead of having one group correction factor, we will now have two, one for import and one for export. It's probably worth noting that they will fall about one. So if import was 1.1, then export would be 0.9 or vice versa according to the calculation. So you only need to know one of them to be able to understand what the opposite value would be. So just going through this, yes, so they're accessing the industry standing data which they need, that they might need to produce these exception reports to go back to VAS, which I mentioned at the end of the VAS method statement. There's a couple of stages of validation on the outturn data, which is also undertaken before any reports are issued. And this is similar to an existing process in supplier volume allocation, which just checks nothing horrible has fallen over during the calculation process. Talk about accessing that data from the central data collection agent and defines what that data is, and it also sets out how you would validate that CDCA data. And so it calculates the consumption data. So first it calculates the volumes that's non-losses. It then calculates the totals for the associated loss data. Now, because when this is full width, that should just be the data as already calculated by the MDS. So if you look at those two values, it's just saying it equals that incoming data from the MDS. You keep scrolling down, Justin. And so these calculations here, 13 and 14, are elements that you need to do in order to calculate the GSP group correction factors. And so this shows you firstly how you calculate the group correction factors, and there's a number of steps in doing that. You can see 1 to 7 there. And then once you've calculated them, you then need to apply them. So that section 15 there shows you how you apply those correction factors to the various consumption component classes, which are the bins of consumption and losses that stuff's being allocated to for each BM unit. We've got the steps here about validating the outturn results, just to make sure that nothing funny has gone on there. And then it's got certain requirements for reporting which aren't actually used sort of downstream at the SAA, so they need to calculate the supplier deemed take. So any supplier within a GSP group might have more than one BM unit, but supplier deemed take would sum across those BM units. And then we've got the calculations that are calculating the onward values that go to the settlements administration agent for the imbalance settlement calculations. And then there's a few bits about doing the calculations for the storage facilities register, and I think that's it, Justin. And then we've just got some examples of the consumption component classes. These will be set out in ISD, which we'll come on to shortly. So we're starting market-wide half-hourly settlement CCIDs at 100, and they're divided up differently than the current consumption component classes. So you've got the market segment, unmetered, smart or advanced, active import, active export. Is the data for consumption? Is it for losses? What the connection type is the data that you're processing, actual data or estimated. And in order to undertake those GSP group factor calculations, you also need this thing called a scaling weight, and this tells you what the scaling weight is for each of the consumption component classes.
And those scaling weights are initially set, or there are suggested values which came from the CCDG, but will need to be set for market go live. Yeah,
they will be, and also we need to change the ones for the existing CCCIDs for transition. So I think the important thing is currently the scaling weights for export are set to 0 because of a problem with the calculation. Now we've changed the calculation, so we've got these two group correction factors. We can have non-zero scaling weights against active import consumption component classes, which is what you're seeing here. But we also need to change the old ones so they're non-zero as well.
Yeah, and basically GSP group correction is applying that difference between all the summed metering system metadata and what goes into a GSP group, and the principle of the scaling weight is to work out what error in energy should be applied to that particular consumption component class. Okay, well we've done a whistle-stop tour of the settlement process. I just want to spend 5 minutes on ISD, and then we can have 15 minutes for questions. So if I press the right thing, have I got ISD? I have. So industry standing data. It's sort of like the operational parameters that we need to do, that everybody needs to adhere to make settlement work. We've got a BPM here, and ISD covers, I think, 3 main elements. It's got the industry standing data, which is sort of mirrors market domain data as now. It's got the settlement timetable, which shows you all the dates, the operational choreography that the various actors have to operate to. It's got the line loss factors, and therefore the process is sort of like centered around those things. You'll see those sort of three boxes of ISD change process, ISD approval process, and synchronization with MDD still in yellow because they're still to be defined. The working assumption is that we currently have a market domain data process as defined under the BSc, and that will form the basis of what is needed for MDS going forward.
Justin, did we lose you there? Have you muted yourself?
You did? Sorry, I was just
no worries.
Get rid of my phone that was ringing in the background, so apologies for that. So we've basically got a process here of receiving the line loss factors, validating them, resolving any issues, and then them going into the ISD approval process. We've got the ISD change requests are coming in the ISD change process, and that again will go through into the ISD approval process. And we've got the settlement timetable that's being created, which sets out all the different runs of LSS, MDS, SAA, FAA, so forth and so on, and that will go into the approval process. Once all that is approved, then we've got ISD storing the settlement timetable, storing LLF data, which is then made available to various people that need it, and also storing the ISD entities that we will show you in a minute. Now, there is some sort of investigation validation which happens on the front end there. Now, ISD going forward, how is it accessed by the market? The process that we've defined is that via the data integration platform, when ISD has been changed, you will be notified via the IF47 or the Pub 47 that something is changed in ISD. In that notification there will be the location of how you therefore can access the ISD data. And there's two main ways to access that ISD data. It will be hosted by Elexon on what we've called a hosting platform there. And you will receive a URI on how to get that from a web location, but also you will have access via an API. And there also will be a human readable version. But basically, market participants will be accessing ISD from this web location API, and also there'll be a human readable form, just like there is today. That's how ISD will work going forward. What I want to show you now is a couple of other design artifacts which give you the full story of ISD. You'll see there is an entity map, and what we've got here is a list of all the entities. You'll see that it's got like a Moscow rating of must have, and all the first ones are the ones that are actually in MDD. So market participant, you'll expect that to stay. It's a must have, it's a retain. There's a reference to the MDD existing entity reference that it is now, and if you had followed all the CCDG work in one of their published documents, there was actual reference to that. There's some comments as to support that, and any sort of if there's further work that's needed to be done now, and also if there is a link with MDD, then that will be there shown there. also, if things aren't being taken through from MDD into ISD, you can see here it says it won't have. Let me just make that a little bit bigger. It's not in ISD. The current proposed process is that these will be kept as part of transition in MDD, frozen at the start of transition, i.e. the frozen when market-wide half-hourly settlement goes live and the start of migration, and kept here at least 5 years after the end of that transition, after the end of the last MPAN that has migrated. So you'll see that all in the entities there. If you therefore scroll down, and excuse me if I'm going a bit fast here, but what you'll see here at the bottom are a number of new ISD items, like market segment, basically the new data items that we need, and you'll see some supporting information there. So this document gives you a list of all the entities. There is a document which goes with that, which, if I can find it here, is the industry standing data entities data items. This mirrors a bit of what there is already published for MDD. And what Kevin has done, bless him, he's populated this with all the data items that are associated with that entity. So you'll see a drill down of what there is by market participant ID, for example. There'll be a description of what each of those data items are and an example. And you'll see that everything is in there. There's the existing items. And then I think if you go right to the end, you'll see the UMS ones there. I'm just trying to find a new one there. For example, like this one, valid market segment metering system. So you'll see the new ones there with the. And I think that's what we've got in ISD. I'm going to take a bit of a breath, and I've just gone over a couple of minutes. We've got. I just want to very quickly not press that button. Show you here, highlight 2 further sessions that I think will be of interest for you. On the week of the date of the 26th, we've got a settlement deep dive. So once you've digested all this stuff that we've presented today, there's an opportunity to get into more of the nitty-gritty regarding settlement. And we also have the design surgery, which is scheduled for the 1st of September. So I just earmark those that you've seen already. Right, Kevin, questions?
Plenty of questions there, Justin. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that, look, if we don't get to your question today, we are taking all of the questions that we received throughout the design playback period. We're editing them from clarity and length, combining where there is overlap, and we're seeking answers as well. That'll be put on the collaboration base. So the first batch of questions were uploaded yesterday, and we'll make sure to get that link out to you folks as well. So if your question isn't answered today, it'll be answered in the future and on the collaboration base. But let's breeze through these, Justin. Let's see how many we can get done. First question, does the DC publish reads immediately, and where program participants are subscribed, they receive the info? Or is the publication delayed in line with existing schedules, i.e. the Elexon timetable?
It's probably worth mentioning the operational choreography document, which gives the time frame with which you have got to publish it. But basically, it's immediately, if you validated it, you need to get it out the door as fast as you can. But if you look in the operational choreography, that gives the SLAs associated with that.
Yeah. So you basically publish immediately, but you've got a backstop of, I don't know, 3 working days, whatever it says in the operational choreography document, to get all your data that you're responsible for as a data service to Elexon Central Systems. That's
great. Thanks, folks. Perhaps we could get that the choreography piece as part of these slides when we upload them onto the collaboration basis. That would seem to be super helpful. The smart data processing service, is this the rough equivalent of the data processing component of the current data collector role?
It's, well, apart from what it's processing is completely different. You know, if you look at the non-half-hourly data collector, that's doing non-half-hourly processes and using profiles and things like that. But this is you know, basically collecting and using half-hourly data, or where there's not half-hourly data, it's estimating half-hourly data, whereas a non-half-hourly data aggregator is only calculating annual consumptions or estimated annual consumptions, and the data aggregators just adding them up. So I think that's the key difference.
Yeah, I think I'd reinforce that. You think the non-half-hourly data collector role is going, or after the end of transition, Elexon Central Systems will only be receiving half-hourly data, and that half-hourly data will actually be either Pucker half-hourly data collected from the various types of meter, or it will be based on, you know, daily advance or an advance that covers, you know, a greater period, and the SDS or ADS will be using the load shapes to get those daily reads and create the half-hourly data to be put into central settlement. Kevin, next question.
Thank you, folks. Could there be an increased GSP group correction needed if the load shaping service half-hourly volumes are generic compared to MSID specific EAC if there's still a large number of legacy meters?
Well, I think group the correctable volume should reduce because you're going to have a lot more actual data, and obviously the profiles aren't hugely accurate. The load shapes will be calculated using actual data for the settlement date, so they should be reflective of the temperature on that date. They should be reflective of illumination on that date, and they're also regional instead of national. And the sample sizes are going to be significantly larger for each load shape category than the current 600 odd metering systems that are used to produce a load profile. So hopefully they should be more accurate.
Yeah. So the expectation, the assumption is that GSP group correction or that difference in energy should be less because you're using more accurate meter readings, actual, as Kevin has said, half-hourly data, or using more accurate load shapes for converting those sort of daily reads and hopefully not just, you know, quarterly or monthly, you know, yearly reads. So it should be more accurate.
Super, thanks, folks. Is the data processing service responsible for sending out half-hourly consumption to the respective participants, such as supplier, HHDA, and LDSO?
Yes, the caveat there is not an HHDA because an HHDA doesn't exist, so it's MDS. But yes, the data processing service is responsible, and that will be covered by each of the data processing service BPM or requirements for sending the appropriate half-hourly data. Well, they will publish that onto the DIP. The various participants will subscribe to those events. So I perhaps slightly amend my answer is the data service is responsible for putting those messages on to the DIP, and then the subscriber to those events or those messages will then receive them.
Super.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. What is the difference between vol data IF21 outbound from the ADS and the data subsequently published to the supplier, published 021 via DPI?
I think that
should be DIP. I think
that should be DIP, and there is no difference. Interfaces are designated as inbound messages to the DIP. Publications are outbound messages. The only material difference is that the publication coming out will have transaction IDs, etc., that the DIP applies to it.
But the data is the same.
The data is the same, yeah.
Super.
Okay,
Thank
Kevin.
You. Is the volume data? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying we're rattling through these. Carry on, Kevin.
Yeah, let's keep it going. Is the volume data quality flag different from the actual or estimates, A or E?
So there are actuals and estimates quality flags on against each settlement period that's on the IF21. There's also an estimation reason code. I'm not sure if that is answering the question.
I read that we can take away.
Yeah, okay. I read that question is, have we got A&E flagged at the moment, but under half-hourly assessment, we've broken down the estimated flag into, different categories.
Okay, super.
Okay.
So this one is somewhat similar to the first question we asked, but is the publication of the half-hourly interface 021 data constrained to the Elexon schedule, or is it responsive to events of initial read and subsequent rereads?
Again, the SLA is in the operational choreography. Obviously, if you don't get a read initially, you've got to estimate, and there's a timescale associated with that. But if you do read the meter and you get better quality data, then there's a requirement to resubmit that in a timely manner.
Super. Thank you, Kevin. Could the method statements not be drafted with gender neutral language? I think that's actually a really important point of feedback, and definitely one we can take into the program and look at 100%. Next point, if the data above the maximum permissible value, is there a way to mark it as valid so it is used, or can it be only rejected and estimated over?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I was still trying to digest the previous one.
No problem. If data is above the maximum permissible value, is there a way to mark it as valid so that it is used, or can it only be rejected and estimated over?
Oh, you've got me now. We'll take that away. I think there was some suggestion that there could be some flexibility for say an advanced data service if it still felt that data was valid to process it. I can't off the top of my head remember where we landed on that.
Okay, no problem. We can take that one away. I'm going to shift now away from taking the questions in a timeline fashion to the most popular as we're moving into the last few minutes. Question 1, can a supplier interact directly with the smart data services, e.g. to get the register level readings needed for billing smart and traditional meters?
I think the answer is yes.
Excellent. Nice, short and sharp.
I think the expectation though is that the supplier should have his own. Well, he can obviously agree what he wants with his smart data service, because that's within his gift and on a commercial basis. But in terms of billing data, the supplier should have the access to the meter himself to collect that.
Excellent, thank you. In the smart data service, so all meters will be 2-rate, and all other tariffs and therefore SSCs are no longer required. Is this the case?
They won't necessarily be 2-rate. You can configure, the time of use registers to whatever you want. But obviously, we only need the profile data, the half-hourly data from the meter for settlement purposes. There will be some trad meters out there that will be 2-rate.
All right.
I think subject to that qualification, the answer is yes.
Super. We've 3 questions here that relate to BP 004 data collection. So a lot of the people who are engaged with us are asking if this was going to be covered today, and for the data collection process, and if it isn't, will we have a session in the future that covers it?
I think what we could do with either cover that in the deep dive, or let's take that away.
Sure, we can take that away. I will also note that for the design surgeries and the deep dives, the Slido will be open 2 days in advance, so you can submit your questions in advance, and that will be all linked in the reminder email. The detailed BPEL process diagrams are great. However, in a nutshell, descriptions or diagrams of services with inputs and outputs will be greatly useful if this is something the program could provide. Want to take away?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Justin. Currently, the DC will validate a D0010 sent to them and return a V/F D0010 in response. How will the SCS communicate value failures back to the suppliers? Val failures back to the supplier. That should be. I think that might be volume failures, perhaps.
Might need to call Elisa in, but I mean D10s will be available, but obviously it's not the main data item that we're using. Because we've got the half-hourly data.
I think D10s will be issued out to suppliers and the LDSOs.
Thank you, Alyssa. Right.
Super.
Kevin, can we bring down the shutters? It's now 12 o'clock.
We can indeed, and as I noted earlier, folks, all the questions will be taken into the program. We'll draft answers and they'll be uploaded to the collaboration base. So if your question wasn't answered today, it will be in the near future, and we'll link out to that as soon as it's available.
So all it requires me to do is to thank you all for your time today and those really, really good questions. I've been really impressed with the amount of participation and the level of and types of questions from you all. I hope that you found these sessions useful. If there are things that are missing and you believe aren't covered by the further scheduled sessions, please let the program know and we will do our best to follow up those requests as best we can. So wish you a good rest of the Friday. I hope you managed to say.
Sorry, Angela, can you submit your question on Slido and we'll pick it up?
Okay. All it bid me to say goodbye and try and stay cool for the rest of the day or the weekend even. Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you, folks.
Justin.
Thanks, Justin. Have a good day.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Cheerio.